Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. We're going to get right to the show after these messages.
Hi, this is Justin Connor, director of The Golden Age, and you're listening to the podcast Mysterious Goings On.
Hey folks, we're back with Frank Zafiro. If you didn't catch last week's show, I would encourage you to go back and check it out wherever you get your podcast, or go to mgopod.com for the links. There's a whole preface to this conversation we're getting ready to have today that you're going to want to check out. So do me a favor and check that out. And don't worry, we'll wait for you right now. We're going to go get a chili dog and hopefully not have to throw it out the car window or something. Let's talk about the writing. Let's talk about the work. I think we've got a good handle that you're certainly prolific. You say more than 30 books out at this point, right?
Yeah, I think when I counted earlier this year, it was 32.
Wow. And you've done them. You've also co-written with others, which is a whole other interview, I think, because I'd love someday to talk to writers who've worked together. It seems to be, for a lot of people, a bridge too far, but if you can make it work, it's probably a great experience, wouldn't you say?
Well, that's why I have 32. I mean, half of those are co-written. So when people are at all impressed by the number 32, I always tell them, don't be so impressed. I cheated on half of them, which isn't entirely true, because I mean, you may only be writing half the book, but you're editing it 100%. You're doing everything else, marketing, all of that 100%. But it is a way to be more prolific if you can make it work. And I've been fortunate with 5 different people to have that kind of a relationship. So it has worked.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So let's talk about the indie publishing scene. Was that always your plan? Go indie? Did you attempt to go trad? What happened with you?
Definitely attempted to go traditional. I think what happened, looking back now in 2021, when I was trying to go traditional in the early to mid 2000, the aughts, I guess, is that what that's called now? I don't think I presented my work, which may not have been polished enough anyway. And I don't think I presented it in a way that made it attractive to publishers or to agents at the time. And so, it just wasn't slick enough of a query letter. It wasn't might have been borderline anyway as work, to begin with. And so I got nibbles and send me the first 10 pages, send me the whole manuscript. We're going to pass sort of things. And ultimately ended up going with a couple of very small presses for the first few years. And actually, I mean, I'll tell the condensed version of this, but I published the first book with a small press. Then he didn't want to, it was a one-man show actually. And then he didn't want to publish the second book. And I asked him why, and he said, well, is it because it's not good? And he said, no, it's probably better than the first book, to be honest with you. But it had a child in peril, and nobody will read that, according to him.
Oh.
And I said, well, I'm not changing it. And everything bad that happens to this child happens off screen, off the page. It's just inferred. So he said, well, I'm not publishing it.
Wow.
So I said, well, then I'm going to have to go elsewhere. And he said, okay, but I'm not giving up the first book until the term runs out. So I went and got a different publisher. I found another publisher for the second book. And the plan was to wait till the first book I got my rights back, and then they'd publish that too. Meanwhile, they'd continue the series. They published the first book. It was the first time I was published in hardback, and did a really great job, but they overreached. They published too many books at once, not enough marketing behind any of them. And after about 2 years, year and a half, they went under. So
Yeah.
now I had an abandoned series, and I kind of had a bad divorce in both cases when it came to communication. It was spotty. It was difficult. The first guy was in Georgia. The second one was in Florida. I was up in the Pacific Northwest. That's kind of tough. So for the third time around, I actually found a publisher in Spokane, Washington that was just now breaking into publishing fiction. They had published guidebooks in the past, and it was an offshoot business of a printing business.
Yeah.
Gray Dog Press was the name of it. And the guy there, Russ, was a super guy, and they did a great job. They took on the whole series. They tried real hard to get a regional and then a national distribution deal, and it just never quite came to fruition. And so eventually, a few years ago, they killed their print fiction line and just went back to just guidebooks, and then serving as a printer for self-publishers if you wanted them to. Well, while they were publishing the hardback, they didn't have any interest in the ebooks, and this was around 2010. And so that was when self-publishing of ebooks was coming out. And I thought, well, I've already got the paperbacks out there. Why don't I publish the ebooks so I'm in that marketplace? And so I started self-publishing in that way. And then when, other books came along and nobody wanted to publish them or didn't like it that I was with another publisher, so they didn't want to pick it up. And this publisher wasn't interested in stuff that wasn't set in Spokane and so forth. I ended up publishing the paperbacks as well. So I kind of fell backwards into it. And then moved about, 2015, 16, moved into working with another small press that I was pretty excited about. But what it really came down to, Alex, was in today's market, when I look at what indie publishing versus traditional publishing, what can a traditional publisher do for me as the author that I can't do for myself? And it's become less and less. Now, still some important things, but less and less. I mean, I can hire as good an editor as I can get in a trad publisher, maybe better if I'm willing to spend. Book cover design, I'm on equal footing there too if I'm willing to spend the money. All the things that go into formatting and designing a book. Where the two things I decided that a traditional publisher could do for me that were difficult or impossible, or, well, nothing's impossible, difficult for me to do for myself at the time, were marketing and distribution, particularly marketing.
Yeah.
And just that cachet that comes with being with a particular publisher, that legitimacy that traditional publishing is still clinging to. And so I went with a smaller to mid-sized publisher that, to accomplish those two things.
Right.
And they did a great job with the book covers and the editing and all the other things that I could do for myself, but they did a good job of it. And they had a good name. And so I felt like I was getting good pop for that legitimacy piece, if that's important to you. But the marketing wasn't there.
Yeah.
And that was the piece that ultimately I wasn't seeing any more sales with my traditionally published books than those books that I continued to publish independently on my own. And that led me to a business decision just earlier this year, January, to separate from that publisher. And that was a very, very amicable parting. I just explained it as a business reasoning, and they agreed, and we came to an understanding on how to sever the contract in a way that was fair for both of us. And, and that was done. And it's been great. I still have a relationship with them on several levels, just not with most of my books. Because marketing is something that, Random House or Penguin, they're gonna kick my butt on that for sure, because they've got a lot more money to put behind it, a lot more brand recognition, and they have that legitimacy piece, which is, it doesn't hurt to put the two together. But I wasn't getting that from the smaller publisher, and so I elected to go out independently. So that's where I'm at now. I'm 99% independent.
That's that is not an unfamiliar story that I've heard from a lot of writers who've been in the game as long as you and I have. Mine's slightly similar to that. I appreciate what you said about how maybe at the time, like I got a lot of requests for partials and some fulls, and mine was around 2008, and then the bottom fell out of the economy, and that was the excuse I got, or not excuse, it was the reason I got from an agent who was pretty excited about it. And then I just, after 100 rejections, with that, just decided to try it. This was, and because you were there too, right? But this is where it was just like the indie stuff was there. My grandfather was traditionally published for 50 years, passed away in the 90s. I mean, he would have been just, he would have just been mortified that I was doing that because it's all vanity press, right?
Right. Well, and Vanity Press was Vanity Press, right? I mean, I stayed away from that for a reason. You're basically selling your book out of the trunk of your car with vanity presses.
Yeah.
But I saw this as something different.
Yeah, well, you have distribution, and say what you will about Amazon, but they give you the tools. Now, there's a lot of arguments to be made about don't be exclusive with them, and I certainly can hear that. But I started seeing a trend about 4 years ago where 95% of my sales, despite the fact that my books are available everywhere, was through Amazon. And I thought, well, perhaps at least for this series, why don't I go exclusive and then be able to use the tools they give you to market? And I got to be honest, it's helped my sales. But I'm curious if we're getting started here, and we're having a longer conversation than typical. I may have to split this one in two, Frank, especially if you don't bail on me in the next 5 or 10 minutes. But
Here for the long haul, man.
You're all right, great. Yeah. So if people want to visit River City, if people want to get involved with your fiction, I'd love it if you'd say, okay, look, let me take you in hand and put a handcuff on you and say this is the first book you should read to get what you do.
If it is police procedurals that they're interested in, I think there's two possible starting points. The obvious one is the first River City book. It's called Under a Raging Moon. It's the shortest one. It introduces a lot of the characters that you're gonna follow as the main group for at least the first 7 books. The 7th one will be out later this year. But I always throw the caveat in and say that was the first novel I ever truly wrote. I mean, if you don't count the drawer book that we talked about.
Right. Yeah.
And even though I revised it in 2010 when Grey Dog Press put it out, and brought the difference between 1995 me and 2010 me, the craft progression to bear on it, I didn't completely rewrite it. I did a revision, and so. That's a lot different. And so I always felt like the bones of that earlier novel still show through, and that even though I think I'm proud of the book, it's got a 4.2, 4.3, something like that on Amazon with hundreds of reviews. I mean, it's not a dog,
right? But
I always feel like, look, when you get to the second book, you'll see a difference in the writing. And when you get to the third book, you'll see a bigger difference in the writing, and that's progression and that's growth. So if you like the first book, stick around, because I feel like the delivery only gets better. But you get introduced to Thomas Chisholm. You get introduced to Stefan Kopriva, who ultimately has a spin-off detective series. And most importantly for me, you get to meet Katie McLeod, who has really become the core of the series for me. And so that's a good place to start. In that series, the cops are the good guys. They're not perfect. Some of them are jerks. They fail sometimes, but their hearts and intents are pure. And so that's kind of the way that one works. And it's, like I said, it starts in 1994, and the newest one will be out this year, and it's set in 2003. So I'm trying to catch up slowly. And that's kind of fun too, because your characters progress and age and change, and Katie in book 6, she's bearing the psychic weight of books 1 through 5, and some stuff happened to her in those books, and the fact that she's still there and she hasn't given up, and she's still a good person and still trying to do the job. There's some storytelling there that I didn't realize I was going to be telling when I just started wanting to tell cop stories. Right. So that's a great place to start. If you want something that's set in today's setting, a couple of years ago, I guess now, the book I wrote with Colin Conway, a 4-book arc, Charlie 316, is a little more topical, deals with a police shooting, gets into questions of race in America, a little bit, and certainly the idea of noble cause corruption, which if you Google that, you'll see why it's probably inevitable that it ends up in one of my books. And that's a great place to start. And it introduces you to my buddy Colin, who has several series set in Spokane. The area code for Spokane is 509. And so he's got the 509 universe and a series of procedurals set in there, and some other series that are coming out that are just great. But this was a book that a series that we wrote together, and it's a good place to start. If you're looking for something gritty, then really any of the other series are great. I mean, Blood on Blood is kind of a hard-boiled noir sort of book, and starts the Anya series. I wrote a series with Eric Beetner, a trilogy about a pair of assassins, mob hitmen. And in the first one, the mob's downsizing, so they don't really know each other at first when the book starts, but they're given competing lists to clean out, and if whoever kind of gets done first is probably going to keep their job. Is the premise there? And Eric Beetner is a fantastic writer. If you want breakneck reading, if you want to read a book that reads like 24 the show played, you can't go wrong with virtually anything that he wrote. And it was hard in a way to keep up with him when writing that series, because he's just so able to crank it up another notch of ridiculous but plausible events. And we wrote 3 books together. He won the gross out award in all 3. He's got the best gross out scene of all 3. And I tried in a couple of them, but my silver medal isn't even, I shouldn't even be standing on the podium with that silver medal. And he's great. He hosts a podcast called Writer Types. So if people are looking to maybe, learn about other writers out there that they want to, discover or hear more from a writer they know, he does some great interviews, and he gets big names on there. It's not it's not being done out of a shoebox. It's
not like this one.
Oh no, you're great. But he's a professional editor. That's his day job. He edits television.
Oh,
and
nice.
So the production values, I mean, I have a podcast and I work hard on production values, but I'm a single A ball player, and he's, playing in the bigs. So
right there with you.
Definitely shows.
I'll have to look that up and put a link in the show notes. You do one of your own as well, which I want to get to in just one second. Before I lose this thought, I really appreciate what you said, though, about your first book. And I often find myself in that position of it, kind of saying to people, because I just did a 4th revision because we had some issues with something, a formatting issue that just slipped by us on our 3rd. And then while I was in there, I couldn't resist but polishing and tightening on a few things. You can't, right? You're never done.
No.
Being a writer is like always having homework, right? I mean, it's always, but I was going to say,
always straightening the picture on the wall.
Always. And I was going to say to you, though, from what I heard, I want to tell you, I appreciate you saying that, because I often find myself in this position of not apologizing for, but maybe explaining about that first book. And my second book in my soon-to-be 8-book series did incredibly well critically and sold well and all that stuff, for me at least. So I'm always kind of telling people, well, maybe you want to start on the second one, which is okay, and then go back to the first if you like it. So that's probably not a great thing to do, but it's kind of where I am with it, because it is that first book beyond the direct that's in the drawer. And you nailed that too, man. My God, the first couple of things I ever wrote are so, as you said, they're so self-referential and self-centered and terrible, But so I appreciate you saying that, and I'd just like to ask you one question related to then and now, because I do love how you said, the guy from '95 and the guy from 2015 are two different. Do you write faster now, or slower, or has it changed your tempo at all?
I think I edit faster for sure, or more efficiently. I don't know if I write any faster, because I wrote with reckless abandon before. My attitude was puke it up on the page and sort it out if you need to later. Ride that emotion that you're getting from the story, ride that excitement, ride that creative train, as for all it's worth. And I still do that, but I tend to pump the brakes once in a while, and I'm probably revising a little too much as I go. If something is, only moderately interesting at the time, if it's not, busted down the walls, then I might edit as I go a little bit. And I don't know if that's better or worse. Certainly being a collaborator and working with other writers, I've become a better editor than I was before. And I think part of it is, I think that the feedback you would have given, if I sent you the 1995 draft and got feedback from you, I would then hate you. I mean, I didn't take feedback as well, right? I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you get my point.
Sure.
I think I took it personally. Like, what do you mean you don't think this is the greatest thing you ever wrote? I poured my heart into this. This really happened, and this guy is an homage to this great cop who agreed to let me use him as an homage, and this is a great scene, and and now if you ripped it, I'd be like, oh wow, thanks for pointing out to me all the things I need to fix. And what really changed for me was just that realization. Well, of course, realizing I'm not the greatest writer in the world and never will be, so it takes some criticism. But the bigger discovery was just realizing, if you give your work to someone and they give you detailed feedback, they're on your side.
Right.
They're trying to help you.
They're not blowing you off.
No, I had a few instances, particular short stories, where there are people out there, yeah, sure, I'll take a look at your story, and then their goal in sending you feedback is to make you feel like they're a greatly superior writer and you suck. And you just have to excise those people from your beta pool and don't use them anymore, because the majority of people are genuinely, sincerely trying to help you, and they're on your side. Right. And so if they tell you it sucks, it's not that you suck or the story sucks. This thing sucks. Fix it. Make the story better. And once you realize that, I think it's so much easier to take criticism. And then if you're open to criticism, you're going to end up with a better end product. And I'm not saying take everybody's advice. It's your story. It's your book. I'm just saying consider everyone's advice. Don't reject it because it hurts your feelings.
Right. And or there's the people who will beta and then maybe they're intimidated and they just want to try and correct your grammar. And you expressly say that you're not here for my grammar. You're here to, does this read well? Now, I'm happy if you find a typo, tell me. Great. Then I can fix that before I pay an editor, right? Gosh, if I paid editors by the typo, oh my God. But I there's that. So I appreciate that. It's funny. I opened up my beta pool for this next book up and I don't normally do this, but I put it on my personal Facebook page. I have 11 people who want to read this thing. And I'm thinking, that's too many actually for me. But I can't say no because I foolishly just opened it up and said, I'll send you an arc. Would you, but what I'm going to do, Frank, and I want to know if you do this is for the writers listening. I'm going to make sure they're explicit. There's a sheet I want them to take, right? And there's an explicit instructions on the sheet. You're not here to, be my English teacher. You're not here to do this. How's the story move you? How's the pacing? Did you know who did it way before? Is that something you do, or you just say, read it and tell me what you think?
First off, I think that's a great idea, particularly with the situation you just outlined. I kind of have a pool of beta readers who they're like a SWAT team. They all have their role, and they're all super good at it.
Nice.
And that's the first time I thought to equate them to a SWAT team, but it really kind of works because, if I give the story to my wife, and of course she's my first reader for virtually everything.
Yep.
She's not concerned with typos. I mean, she'll tell me there were a lot of typos or whatever if there were, but she's not. Unless there's a typo that is like, oh, you just basically really stepped in a steaming pile of it with this typo, you better fix it. Other than that, she just doesn't even worry about it because I have other readers who that's their primary focus. They love copy editing. Sure. They love to read the story, but fix the little, little details that are screwed up, that are wrong, my mistakes. And I love them for that because they catch that. And others are Bora Christie will be better at, I didn't like this character because it makes no sense to me that she would turn on this guy because, and she lays all this out and I'm like, oh, geez, you're right. And so there's that. My buddy Colin and I, we do deep critiques on each other's work. And so he fills that role. I have other writers or other readers who, give me the 30,000 foot view. You know, I liked it a lot, but I felt it was slow. You know, that might be all I get from one reader, you know, but it's a reader who's pretty good at nailing down like what might be globally wrong with a book. And, you know, I think there's like 8 or so that I use fairly regularly. And it's a good number because one thing I found, every single one of them will find mistakes that nobody else did.
Yeah.
And that's important because if nobody finds it, the mistake is still there.
Yeah.
And so that's great. But I think, you know, I've done reads for people where they send along that sheet and tell me what they want. And I'm happy to do that because my tendency is to do too deep of a critique anyway. So if you tell me you want a 30,000 foot view and outline what that means, you're saving me a lot of time because I'm not sending you back a line edit,
Right.
you know, that you're not interested in. And then we've wasted both our times, right?
That's a great point. And I like what you said about your SWAT team, though. You know what? I might even ask people. I don't know. I'm just this is top of my head stuff. You just triggered me on this with the SWAT team idea. Is maybe just say to these folks, hey, listen, are you more interested in finding typos, or are you more interested in developmental, telling me about the story itself or character? You know, and just ask and just say, you can say anything you want on here, but tell me the areas that you're most interested in. And then if that's your focus, what you're best at, I'm fine with that. And the other thing I'm going to ask, though, I just thought of this too, is have you read 1 through 7 before this? And I'm most interested, frankly, in the ones who have not read the rest of the series, if it makes any sense at all. So, man, look at this
that's
masterclass.
A great idea, Alex, because the series I wrote with Colin, the Charlie 316 series, starts with a 4-book arc. There are going to be other books that are set in that universe that'll be standalones that exist in the same world, but the first 4 books are a connected arc. And by the time you get to book 4, boy, there's a lot of, you know, webs that have been spun and relationships and situations and things the characters know and have done. And one of the concerns that we had was, okay, if somebody picks up that, you know, code 4 first, are they going to be completely lost? And so we made sure to have a couple of readers in the beta stage who hadn't read books 1 through 3.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect canary, you know, to figure out if you've got enough backstory. But then, of course, the other ones who have read the first 3, they'll tell you if there's too much backstory. Like, yeah, I already know that. You didn't need to spend 5 pages, you know, on what they bought at the grocery store. Okay, we can move on. and that's a tough balance, right? Backstory versus forward momentum. And so I think having somebody who hasn't read the rest of the series is a fantastic idea.
Okay, well, this is great masterclass here from Frank Zafiro on how we're supposed to do this. I you know what, we've made this into a 2-parter, and I appreciate this, but I'd be remiss, and before I let you go, sadly, but not to ask about your own podcast. I'd love to know. Tell our folks where they can find it, what it's about, and what type of guests.
The podcast is called Wrong Place, Right Crime, as in right the crime. My wife came up with that.
Nice.
Credit where credit is due. And you know, I mostly interview crime fiction authors. That's the focus. And the reason I wanted to start doing the podcast was to promote other crime fiction writers.
That's so cool.
I think as a writing community in general, and certainly if you're part of a genre, promoting each other is what we should be doing. I mean,
Amen.
That's what community is. And trying to do that is difficult when you're trying to promote yourself as well. And a podcast to me just seemed like a great way to do it. Plus, you know, from 2017 onward, I've been a full-time writer at home, and it's provided a great social outlet to meet people or to get to interview your friends and so forth. So it's been great from that respect. And it's available on, you know, anywhere you get your podcasts. It's, you know, Spotify, Podbean, you know, all the places that you might go. Just either type in Frank Zafiro or Wrong Place, Right Crime, and it'll pop up. Like you, I have a season essentially from September to June, and then a summer break. My wife's a teacher, and I like to try to do a little bit less during the summer to have more opportunities to just do something with her when she wants to.
Right.
And we live in Central Oregon, so there's outside stuff to do during the summer.
Nice.
So I was 4 seasons down, well over 100 episodes, 124, I think, was the season finale. And right now it's still going to be weekly, about a 15 to 20 minute open and shut episode most weeks, but then once a month, a feature episode that lasts about as long as you and I have talked today.
Right.
And it's just fun to dive into, especially in the longer episodes, maybe things that you wouldn't normally talk about in a shorter interview, and find out about somebody's hobby, or, the genesis behind a character, or how a particular book happened, or, talking to people about book, being optioned for film and so forth. And it's been really cool because I'm sure you have experienced this. You get to meet people that you might not have been able to meet before. I mean, I interviewed
Absolutely.
Christopher Moore, the humorist, very cool guy, very nice guy, one of the most down-to-earth celebrities that I've met. I got to interview Walter Mosley, Eric Van Lustbader. And then I discovered people I didn't know that should have been high up on my list. I mean, I interviewed a guy named James Swallow this last season, and he's going to be the season kickoff for season 5. And here's a guy who has his own series of thrillers, the Mark Dane series, but he also writes in a lot of other intellectual property, plays in other sandboxes, if you will, has written Star Trek novelizations, Highlander, Warhammer. I mean, a whole bunch of other ones. And we ended up talking for, an hour, and then another 2 hours after we finished recording. And I'm like, this guy's amazing, super nice guy too, but an amazing writer, because that's hard, I think, right? To jump into somebody else's sandbox, and he's been very successful at it. And so, I mean, do you find that you basically increase your network of friends by having this show?
I have, and I just interviewed a gentleman the other day. He's kind of contemporary of ours in age and time. His name is E.J. Findorf, who would be a great guest for you, by the way. And he's writes all his stuff. It's New Orleans-based thrillers and crime,
cool.
and he and I are already planning to go to Thriller Fest next year in NYC together if we can. But I've done that, and I've met other writers who have made me a better writer by, like you've done today, by giving me some ideas. And by the thing I get from this too, the lifeblood of this for me, Frank, is I get excited again, and I realize that, by the way, I'm not the top selling writer ever. And I know, as you said about yourself, I know I'm not the best writer ever, but by golly, I have a voice, and I've said some things that have entertained people over the years, and I'm not through, and I want to keep going. And I love it. By the way, I'm looking, just a couple. We've had our previous guest, Lee Matthew Goldberg, who I think is
he's
a
been
really
on the show. Yeah.
Very interesting talent. Gary
Did
Lippman.
you read The Ancestor?
No, I read Orange, the Orange City. Have you read
I haven't
Orange
read
City?
that one yet. I read The Ancestor by Lee Matthew Goldberg, and that was good.
It's good stuff. Yeah. So there's lots of them, and I meet them, and that's the thing too. And it's, I try not to abuse the privilege and bother people who've been on this show. But if I feel like we connected, if I got a question, it's really great to ping them and just say, hey, by the way, I had a guy, Simon King in Australia. He looked at some of my books online. He goes, he said, mate, your descriptions are terrible.
Oh my God.
But he meant it kind of, and then he said, let me punch it up for you. And you want to know something?
Yeah.
I did it, what he told me to do. My sales, now I market too, but my sales seem to have gone up by about 3 to 5%. That can't have hurt. So
no, and we're all good at certain things, and we're all weaker at certain things, and having that writing community be so giving for him to be willing to do that, to kind of punch up maybe one of your weaker areas so that it meshes better with where you're strong. I mean, that's just fantastic.
It really is.
It's great. I mean, I was on a guy's show, a guy named David Temple has a couple of different podcasts, and he had me on, and we got talking, and he's also a voice actor. I ended up using him for a couple of audio projects.
Sweet.
And then he'll be on the show next season. But I guess it's a form of networking that just sounds so mercenary. But,
yeah.
But if you mean it in the sense that you just described, it's essentially about making acquaintances that might become friends.
Yeah.
And if you look at it that way, then it's not mercenary, because people can tell if you're just being friendly because you're going to ask them for a blurb later.
Yeah.
Which is fine. Which is fine. I'll give you a blurb if you ask for one, and if you have a cop question, hit me up. I'll gladly answer it.
Wait, this is on the record? I was getting ready to tell you something, Frank. Frank, you want to see? I've been doing this nearly 20 years. Look how timid I am. I've never had the nerve to ask another writer for a blurb. I just have never felt comfortable doing it.
I rarely do. I don't know how much they help, to be honest with you. And it's kind of a cost benefit analysis. Am I going to annoy the person by asking? Is it going to cash in some of our friendship capital on something that may not be a huge benefit? But at the same time, if I'm asked, I always, agree unless it's something I'm not comfortable with.
Right.
Because it's an inexpensive way to help out another writer. Why wouldn't you do that if you can?
I've done it for. I've done now. I didn't say I haven't asked. I've had them done for me by people just offered. You know what I mean? Like, or they read it and I wrote a review on Amazon, which I think is fair game. I ask them. By the way, I'm going to lift this off, and then the one I had a guest on. I won't say who, but he said something really nice about one of my books on Twitter. But it wasn't. He was just like, "Oh yeah, I read that. I've got to write you a good review." It was a cracking good read, and I was like, I can't do that. I've got to ask him. You can't just lift that. I don't know. I felt awkward about that, but maybe I'm a little too precious about it. I don't know. But I'm like you, Frank. I don't want to cash in or be seen as cashing in on a friendship or an acquaintanceship by doing that.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. But I like we've said, it's a good community. The crime fiction community is by and large very, very positive, very supportive. And I mean, I'm proud to call a lot of people in that community personal friends. Now, maybe a lot of that relationship has been developed virtually, online, with punctuated by the occasional conference, in-person meeting. But that doesn't make it any less real. I mean, I've going back to collaborating, I wrote like 15, 16 books with 5 different people. And I wrote 3 books with Eric Beetner before we ever spoke live. I wrote 4 books with Jim Wilski before we met in Dallas in 2019 at BoucherCon. I've written 3 books with Lawrence Kelter, and we've never met in person. And so the other 2 were more local to where Colin, I knew him from the job, and Bonnie I knew from the community there in the Pacific Northwest. But I mean, those are real relationships. Those are my friends, not just my collaborators and co-authors. But we built a friendship over writing books together and, communicating online essentially. And it's weird if you go back 20 years, you'd call it sci-fi maybe even, but that doesn't make it any less real.
Frank, speaking of making good connections and friends here, and at the very least, I think I've met a fellow traveler, and I mean that in the best way possible. I've seen a lot of things here. I admire what you've done with your career. I admire also how open-hearted you are, and I think that it serves you well, and I think it will serve readers well to pick up any one of your 32 books. Where's the best place to do such a thing, Frank?
The best place is whatever's easiest for you, to be honest with you. Amazon works great. I mean, I am exclusive on ebooks right now. So if you got KU, it's a free read. I always encourage people too, if you want a hardback, hardcover paperback, either use the library or use a local independent bookstore to order it in.
Nice.
Because that's supporting, a couple of things that deserve your support. And some people are weird about libraries. They think that somehow they're hurting the author by getting it into the library and you're not getting paid for that. Well, yeah, you get paid for that. And once it's in, when it wears out, they're going to order a replacement copy, and maybe they'll order the next book because they have the first book. And you're actually helping a writer out quite a bit if you ask the library to carry one of their books. And they'll do it with paperbacks. They'll do it with, with digital and audio as well. You can use
absolutely
the
will.
System to do that.
And Frank,
whatever's easiest for you.
And Frank, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say this one thing. I've got my books are in about 4 different library systems, but particularly authors, writers out there, there's oftentimes a kind of a submission period a couple of times a year for a lot of library systems where you can, like there's a read local type programs, or sometimes it's a little less formal than that. But if you can get your stuff as just a local artist or local author into your local library, that's a great way, because then you can say, well, I'm in the Kansas City Public Libraries, I'm in the Mid-Continental Midwest, and then you build on that with other library systems. And then the next thing you know, it kind of reminds me of my aforementioned grandfather who wrote Westerns. He was in every junior high school library in America, for goodness sake. Awesome. And they're all out of print now. So guess what I do on eBay constantly? I'm always looking to see if I can get them. Frank Zafiro, I have gosh, you have been so generous with your time. Thank you for allowing me to basically do 2 episodes here with you. It's just really been my pleasure to have you here on Mysterious Goings On. And I forgot one thing. So your website is frankzafiro.com. We'll put links in the show notes at mgopod.com, folks. If you can't find it in your podcast on your phone or wherever you listen to this thing, just go to mgopod.com, and actually you'll probably find more in-depth material on that page about Frank and his books, and I really encourage you to check that out. Frank, again, thank you so much for enlightening us about police procedurals and your writing and your thoughts on writing.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed talking to you. You said fellow traveler, and it's nice to come across one.
Thanks so much for listening to Mysterious Goings On. Don't forget we have a complete archive of all of our interviews, monologues, updates, live readings, dead readings. All of that stuff is available at mgopod.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to us so you never miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual suspects. Please join us there. Again, don't forget, mgopod.com also has links where to find me on social media and how to get in touch in case you want to be a guest here on the show. Well, I think it's time that I move on for this week, but until next time, keep reading.